If you're into your mobile gaming and on Android tablets, not iPads, then you want the best performance. This is it right here. It's from Redmagic and it's called the Nova Gaming Tablet. So Redmagic have their gaming phones with their capacitive triggers. This doesn't have it, but what it does have from the phones is a cooling fan inside it. So it's actively cooled with a 20,000 RPM little fan. There's some RGB in there, so you know it's a gaming tablet. And it's powered by the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. And this version here turbos at 3.4 gigahertz. So it's the top spec version. It's paired up with 12 gigabytes of RAM or 16. And my version here has 256 gigabytes of storage. You can also get one with 512. Now the screen in the tablet, this is 10.9 inches, 144 hertz. Unfortunately, it's an IPS panel. Touch response rate is very good. So the sampling rate is 840 hertz, and it's running Android 14 with RedMagic OS 9.5. And I'll be going through in this video why I think it's the best gaming tablet, and it's mostly because of the cooling and the raw performance you get out of this is very good. So included with the Nova Gaming tablet, we have an 80-watt charger, and it is a Type-C charger. You get the Type-C to Type-C cable in red, and they do include some RedMagic stickers. We have a IPS panel here that's up to 144 hertz. The touch response rate is 840 hertz. 20 megapixel camera right there. And I'll go over the screen in a little bit more detail, but let's focus first on the build of it. So metal unibody build to it that does feel very good. And you see on the back here that we have the RedMagic logo. This is all metal and it's a unibody that it has. Fingerprint smudges, yes, unfortunately it does pick them up. So we have a 50 megapixel camera on the rear with autofocus. There's a dual tone LED flash, 20,000 RPM cooling fan in this with some RPG. And that's part of the thermal transfer pipes it has in here, vapor chamber. So they've done a lot of work to the cooling to make sure it throttles the least and just to give us that best performance. And like I said at the start there, that's the best I've seen in a tablet, as you will see in this review, when it comes to that performance, for Android tablets, that is. The thickness is 7.3 millimeters. We've got our fingerprint reader, always on capacitive, power button. So there are 4 speakers in total, 2 each side. They are DTS, these speakers. They sound good. I'll give you a sample of them later in the video. The other 2 speakers, microphone. In fact, there are 3 microphones in total, and this does support video out our Type-C port, which is USB 3.1. Along the top here, we have 2 other microphones, and then volume up and down, which is made out of metal. That button, it does not rattle. Build quality is very good, feels solid. There's a Pogo port pin connector, and then the 2 holes for the stays for a type cover style keyboard, which I don't know anything about, unfortunately. I don't know whether Redmagic will be selling that, but it looks like there are plans to have a keyboard accessory for this particular gaming tablet. So our screen here has a touch sampling rate that is extremely good for a tablet, that it is 840 hertz, so it responds to touch really well. The instant you tap it, it's going to respond. Now it's 144 hertz maximum frame rate, 550 nits. It's a 2.8K display, so when you look at it closely, you're not going to see any pixels, which is great. And I do like that the gestures are all working well with it. The only downside to the screen is that it's not an OLED or an AMOLED screen. This is an IPS, so I really wish it was OLED. I'm so used to those deeper blacks. But for an IPS, it's not bad, as you can see. It's looking pretty dark here. The blacks aren't bad. But you'll see on the very edges, you probably see it just along the top there. See how the white is uniformed, but on the very edge it is not. You can see it just starts to teeter away. A little bit of almost like darkness comes in, like an edge shadow, which is very common with an IPS panel. The good thing is screen burn we don't have to worry about, but I still would have preferred OLED in this particular tablet. I think it's time just to have everything OLED, which is pretty much what I want in my tech now. So it's running Android 14, it's RedMagic OS version, you can see here, 9.5.9 there. Now I found the UI to be very responsive to touch. I've really had no issues with it. And if you want, of course, it can run split screen, pretty standard. You can even run the apps in little small windows, resize them, pretty standard there. I think the 12 gigabytes of RAM in this base model should be good for most people. However, a lot of games are starting to get massive, as we know, like Genshin Impact. What is that now? 30 gigabytes, I think it is, maybe even a bit more. Huge. So if you have a lot of these big and newer titles, then do expect to run possibly into storage issues. And if you are someone that has a lot of video files on your tablets, then I think the best option would be to go for the 512 gigabyte storage version. Unfortunately, no micro SD card, and on one of these sides here, we're missing a 3.5mm headphone jack, which kind of seems a bit silly. It really should have that gaming tablet. Their phones have it, Redmagic, so why on earth does this not have it? So the performance of the UI 144 frames per second, 144 hertz, it's very quick, very smooth. That touch response is great. I really have no complaints, encountered no major bugs or any issues. When you get your Nova Gaming tablet, there is some bloatware that's pre-installed. So Bolt, Booking.com, there's a few other bits and pieces on there. It's not over the top, but I don't like what I'm seeing, that it's starting to creep in with things like these hot apps and hot games. And there was a menu that when you set it up to try and get you to install even more apps. And I really wish that brands would tone down on this. I mean, it's getting terrible with a lot of them doing this, and even Windows is bad now setting up a new Windows laptop. You've got so many splash screens to go through, and they're starting to really fill things up with so much garbage that most people don't need. Anyway, rant finished. We do have a Widevine level 1 cert, which is very good to see. That means that we've got full HD with Amazon Prime Video, with Netflix that I've tested out, and Disney Plus. All those should be streaming at full HD. However, there is no HDR support. So you can see here with Netflix, this is within the app. It's told me, and I already know watching content on it, that it's in full HD. Great, but HDR, no. This screen's just not capable of it, sadly. So this is where it would be great if we had an OLED or AMOLED screen, and we sadly do not. So Antutu score, very high here, getting over 2 million points. Now, their claim, Redmagic, is that this tablet is capable of 2.3 million, which is very good. I haven't been able to achieve that, but this is still close, and it is the highest score I have ever seen in an Android tablet. So that's why the title is as it is, that it's the most powerful gaming Android tablet, or most powerful Android tablet that I've tested. Throttling is very good. So you can see here we lose, well, just under 12% of performance over 20 minutes with the Wildlife Extreme Stress Test. Now, this is an excellent result because what happens on all the phones, apart from Redmagic's own phones that are fan-cooled, anyone else's, so Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, when I cover the Honor phones, they'll throttle down to 60% here, 59, 54%. They lose half of their performance, but you don't really get that here, and you can see that it's very, very steady. The downside is that on the other side of our tablet here, it's going to get very hot to the touch. But that also means that the cooling is doing its job. It's moving the heat away from the chipset, dissipating it through the back, but that trade-off is it will get warm. The other trade-off is the battery life. So a 10,100 milliamp hour battery, I was expecting around 10 hours. However, with the fan on, which is on pretty much all the time for the performance, and then 144 hertz takes a toll on the screen on time. So 7 hours and 43 minutes. I think that's okay. I would like to have seen a little bit better, but it is what it is with this tablet. Due to the performance, it is understandable that we take a bit of a hit there. Now then, the charging time, thankfully, is very good. 80 watt charging rate, 46 minutes only to charge a 10,100 milliamp hour battery, which is very, very good. Now, it has estimated the capacity is a little bit less. This is typical. It's standard. This capacity here is what they would say it would normally be, and this is what it's worked out that it is, which could be slightly off because I did charge from 17% there to 100%, but great charging time for a tablet like this. Now, a tablet is still a tablet, even if it's a gaming tablet. You're not just going to be gaming on it, are you? Well, I wouldn't be. We have PDF files, and because of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, this is the 3.4 gigahertz version. Of course, overkill for something like eBooks, right? But very, very smooth, great performance. that you don't normally see on most Android tablets, unless maybe you've got one of the latest Samsungs. But even then, they throttle their performance down to well under this. Probably a good quarter less performance than what you'd expect with this. So for eBooks, PDFs, of course, it's going to be absolutely brilliant for that. And you have your eBooks, so you can use it in landscape right now or portrait mode. The only thing is that holding, and I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but trust me, after holding this tablet and using it as an ebook reader or PDF reader, and it's 530 grams, after an hour you start to notice that, and you do wish it was a bit lighter, or you had a kickstand that you could prop it up so it would support its own weight. But the text looks good, it's sharp, it's IPS, you can invert the colors, you can turn on eye care mode, and have this more of a yellow light, filter out the blue light. You get the idea. So not just for gaming, but all of your standard media consumption, ebooks, PDF files, YouTube, and all of that is looking good on this screen. And I like the performance, especially the UI is just so fast. Now, the audio on this is very good. They're loudspeakers, they have a hint of bass to them, and the only downside is with this tablet, with its audio, is there's no 3.5mm headphone jack. And as I mentioned before, the haptics on board is good. You get a nice little pulse. So I'm going to test out the sample track just so you can hear what it sounds like. And this will be at the maximum volume, so you can hear how loud it is. Yikes, that's a terrible song. I apologize for that, but I don't get slammed with a copyright strike. Anyway, you can hear that it's got good volume to it and there's a tiny bit of bass, so good speakers overall. Which is the highest preset for everything graphics quality and then 60 frames per second. That's why it does state custom there. It's telling me, oh yeah, overclocked there. It's going to push the thermals, but this is a demanding game. Now, look at my frame rate here. You can see it is 60 frames per second, and I think in this area as well, it's not the most demanding, but where I've been and testing it out, that frame rate is almost always constantly 60 frames per second. You see it dip down occasionally where I am now, and you get into some big boss fights and some other areas where the graphics are a lot more demanding those visuals, and you will see that the frame rate sometimes dips down to the low 50s, but it is the best I have ever seen. There's no need for me to show you 20 minutes of gameplay or test out thousands of games, because we know the performance of this chipset, and we already know, just like what 3D Mark is showing us, that the throttling is very low. There's barely any throttling. It'll take 20 minutes to get down to 12%, and it really just stays at that. So I could game now for 1 hour, and our performance really is not changing. So fantastic. If you're someone really into your games, your Android games, you want the absolute best performance, you're really serious about that, you hate having lags and stutters, it does not get any better than this. Our tab here, the Nova from Redmagic, is just fantastic for Android tablet gaming performance. Now, the capacitive always-on fingerprint reader, it does work really well. I'll just demonstrate it. You simply tap it and it unlocks our tablet here. So the performance has been consistent, very, very good. It maintains those really high frame rates. You're going to have no problems there. Throttling is a bare minimum. For this chipset, throttling is normally a huge problem, right? Because the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, especially this leading edge version of it, which clocks up to 3.4 gigahertz, can get very hot and it will throttle, especially in phones and even other tablets. But here, only 11-12% performance loss is fantastic. So you get those crazy good frame rates, very fluid, really good performance. Even with the 12 gigabytes of RAM, which is the base spec that I do have here, it performs great. Now, the screen is very responsive to touch with a sampling rate of 840 Hertz, which is well above the 480 typical you see with other brands. And the performance of the UI, all good, and the speakers are really great from that sample I gave you. They're nice and loud, they have a little bit of bass to them. They're, in general, better than what you typically get. But it's odd that there's no 3.5mm headphone jack, no micro SD card support, and the other con, although not a big one, I think, for most people, is that it's an OLED screen, and it's, sorry, not an OLED, it's IPS. And even though it's 144 Hertz, it's an IPS screen that I think is not a bad one at all, because the blacks still look very deep, the brightness is 550 nits, and all up, it's a good screen. But yes, I would have personally preferred to have seen OLED or an AMOLED in here. Even if it's just 120 Hertz, I think would have been fine. But there we go. That is the Redmagic Nova Gaming tablet. If you want the absolute best performance in a tablet for your games with Android, then this here is it. Thanks a lot for watching this review.